A brave young woman stood her ground before an Apache chief and said, "You don't scare me." Something unexpected happened. That moment would echo through the dusty plains of Arizona, and neither of their worlds would ever be the same again. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this. The sun cast long shadows over the rugged plains of Arizona Territory, 1875. The once tranquil settlement of Willow Creek had grown into a modest farming community, where determined homesteaders worked the land despite the harsh conditions. Sarah Montgomery wiped sweat from her brow as she examined the wheat field her family had spent months cultivating. At 22, her sun-kissed skin and calloused hands spoke of years of hard work, but it was her unwavering spirit that defined her. "Sarah, come quick!" her father's voice carried across the field. She gathered her skirts and ran toward the farmhouse, her heart racing. Her father, Thomas Montgomery, stood on the porch with 2 cavalry officers. "Miss Montgomery," the taller officer addressed her, "there have been reports of Apache movements near your property. We're advising all settlers to exercise caution." Sarah's jaw tightened. "We've lived here 3 years without trouble, Lieutenant. We treat everyone with respect, even those your government keeps trying to displace." "Sarah," her father warned, but the determination in her eyes silenced him. After the officers departed, Thomas turned to his daughter. "You shouldn't antagonize them. These are dangerous times. Times made dangerous by broken promises and stolen land," she replied, returning to her work. The following day, Sarah rode to town for supplies. Willow Creek was abuzz with rumors of Apache warriors spotted in the hills. As she loaded sacks of flour onto her wagon, a group of men gathered nearby. "Montgomery's place sits right on their path," one man said. "Shame about that pretty daughter of his." Sarah ignored them, accustomed to such talk. As she prepared to leave, a commotion erupted at the edge of town. Several riders approached, among them soldiers escorting a small group of Apache. At their center rode a commanding figure, tall and proud despite his circumstances. "Chief Rising Wolf," someone whispered. "They're bringing him in to negotiate." Sarah watched as the Apache chief dismounted with dignity. Though surrounded by armed men, he carried himself with an authority that transcended his position as captive. His dark eyes surveyed the hostile crowd, eventually landing on Sarah. She didn't look away. The townsfolk backed up, fear and hostility evident in their posture. When Rising Wolf moved forward, a soldier roughly grabbed his arm. Without thinking, Sarah stepped forward. "Is this how we treat those who come to talk peace?" she challenged loudly. The crowd fell silent. The chief's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes changed as he regarded the young woman who'd spoken out. Major Harrison, the commanding officer, frowned at Sarah. "Miss Montgomery, this doesn't concern you." "It concerns all of us," she replied. "How can we expect peace when we show no respect?" Rising Wolf spoke then, his English deliberate but clear. "The young woman speaks truth. Respect must come before peace." Their eyes met again, an unspoken understanding passing between them. 2 people from different worlds recognizing something familiar in each other. That evening, as Sarah recounted the encounter to her father, he grew increasingly troubled. "These are complicated matters, Sarah. The Army's trying to force the Apache onto reservations. Land disputes, broken treaties. It's not as simple as respect." "Isn't it?" she challenged. "We farm this land because we believe it's ours now. They hunt and live on it because it's been theirs for generations. Meanwhile, everyone suffers." Before Thomas could respond, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Grabbing his rifle, he peered out the window into the gathering dusk. Sarah joined him, gasping when she recognized Rising Wolf approaching alone, his hands raised in the universal sign of peace. Thomas positioned himself protectively in front of Sarah as the chief dismounted. "I come without weapons," Rising Wolf announced. "What do you want?" Thomas demanded, rifle still raised. "To speak with the woman who shows courage when others show fear." His gaze shifted to Sarah. "My people do not wish conflict with yours. But the soldiers push us from our hunting grounds onto barren lands where we cannot survive." Thomas lowered his rifle slightly. "I understand that's difficult. But—" "Father," Sarah interrupted, stepping forward. "Let's hear what he has to say." Rising Wolf's expression remained stoic, but gratitude flickered briefly in his eyes. "Tomorrow, I must give the army my answer about the reservation. Before I decide, I wish to see the faces of those who would be my neighbors. Sarah studied him, seeing not the fearsome warrior of townsfolk tales, but a leader bearing the weight of his people's future. And what did you find? Fear, hatred. His gaze lingered on her. And one face that shows neither. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Rising Wolf turned to leave, pausing at the door. The coming days will bring change. Some will choose fear. Others, his eyes met Sarah's once more. Others will choose differently. After he departed, Thomas turned to his daughter. Sarah, stay away from him. The town already thinks you too friendly with the natives. Is that what bothers you? What people think? She challenged. What bothers me is your safety, he countered. These are dangerous times. Sarah moved to the window, watching Rising Wolf's silhouette disappear into the dusk. Yes, she whispered, and it's time someone was brave enough to make them less so. Little did she know how soon her courage would be tested, or how dramatically her path would intertwine with that of the Apache chief, who'd noticed her when no one else would dare to stand beside him. Days passed with mounting tension in Willow Creek. The meeting between army officials and Chief Rising Wolf had ended in a stalemate, with the Apache refusing relocation to a distant reservation where his people would surely starve. Cavalry patrols increased, and farmers kept weapons close at hand as they tended their fields. Sarah continued her daily routines, though her father insisted she never work alone. While gathering eggs one morning, she heard a soft whistle from the edge of their property. Glancing around to ensure no one watched, she moved toward the sound and found Naya, a young Apache woman she'd met months earlier at the trading post. You shouldn't be here, Sarah whispered, though her face showed delight at seeing her friend. Rising Wolf asks for you, Naya replied in halting English. He says come at sunset, by the old oak near the creek. Before Sarah could respond, Naya disappeared into the brush. Throughout the day, Sarah debated with herself. Meeting the chief alone would be considered treason by many. Yet something pulled her toward this opportunity, perhaps the chance to build understanding where others had failed. As the sun began its descent, she told her father she needed to check their irrigation channels. With a shawl concealing her distinctive blonde hair, she made her way to the meeting place, heart pounding with each step. Rising Wolf waited in the shadows, his tall figure unmistakable even in the fading light. You came, he said simply, a hint of surprise in his voice. I came, she affirmed, maintaining a cautious distance. Why did you ask for me? Because you stood when others cowered. Because you spoke when others were silent. He studied her face intently. The army commander gives my people one more day to decide. After that he threatens force. Sarah's breath caught. What will you do? What would you do, Sarah Montgomery, if strangers came to take your father's farm? If they told you to leave the only home you've known? The question hung between them. I would fight, she admitted softly. But fighting the army means death for your people. A sad smile crossed his face. And surrendering means a slower death on barren land. He stepped closer. Some of my warriors want war. They believe dying in battle is better than starving on a reservation. And what do you believe? His eyes held hers. I believe there must be another way. My grandfather made peace with white settlers who respected our boundaries. Perhaps. A twig snapped nearby. In an instant, Rising Wolf pulled Sarah behind a large tree, his body shielding hers. A cavalry patrol passed less than 50 feet away, oblivious to their presence in the gathering darkness. When they'd passed, Sarah realized how close they stood, close enough that she could feel his breath, see the small scar above his left eyebrow. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that transcended their different worlds. You should return home, Rising Wolf said, stepping back. It's not safe. Nothing seems safe anymore, she replied. But I want to help if I can. He considered her words. There is an elder among my people, Grandfather Morning Star, who once made treaties with white settlers. He remembers a time of peace. Perhaps if he could speak with your leaders. The town council would never agree to meet, Sarah said regretfully. They're too frightened. And you? Are you frightened of me, Sarah Montgomery? The question was direct, his gaze unwavering. No, she answered truthfully. I'm frightened of what fear makes people do. Rising Wolf nodded, understanding in his eyes. Tomorrow night I will bring Morning Star to this place. If you can bring even one person who will listen, perhaps we can find this other way. Sarah returned home, her mind racing with possibilities and dangers. Over dinner, she carefully approached her father. Thomas Montgomery had always been fair-minded, even when neighbors questioned his decision to trade with peaceful Apache bands before tensions escalated. Father, what if there was a chance to prevent bloodshed? To find a solution that doesn't involve forcing the Apache onto barren reservation land or provoking a war? Thomas studied his daughter carefully. You've been talking to him again, haven't you? Sarah didn't deny it. He's trying to prevent a war that would destroy his people. Some of his young warriors want to fight, but he's searching for another path. To her surprise, her father didn't immediately dismiss the idea. The situation is complicated, Sarah. Land rights, government orders, frightened settlers. People are people, father, she interrupted. On both sides. Surely there must be a way to live without destroying each other. Thomas sighed heavily. When I was younger than you before the war, I met an Apache elder who saved my life during a blizzard. He taught me that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources. He paused, conflict evident on his weathered face. What exactly are you proposing? Sarah explained Rising Wolf's request for a small, informal meeting with Morning Star. Thomas listened thoughtfully, then shook his head. It's too dangerous, Sarah. If anyone discovered such a meeting, we'd be branded traitors. More dangerous than war, she challenged. More dangerous than watching people die because no one was brave enough to talk? The silence stretched between them. Finally, Thomas spoke. I cannot support this openly, but... He hesitated. I won't stand in your way. And perhaps I know someone who might listen. The next evening, Sarah returned to the old oak, this time accompanied by Reverend Williams, an elderly pastor who administered to both settlers and natives before tensions escalated. Thomas followed at a distance, keeping watch. Rising Wolf arrived with Morning Star, a wizened elder whose eyes held both wisdom and wariness. For hours they talked quietly by lantern light, about boundaries, water rights, hunting grounds, and the possibility of a local agreement that might satisfy both sides until a more formal treaty could be negotiated. As they prepared to depart, Morning Star grasped Sarah's hand. You have a warrior's heart in a healer's body, he said in his native tongue with Rising Wolf translating. When others see only enemies, you see people. Rising Wolf's eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary. 3 days, he said. Give us 3 days to speak with our people, then we will meet again. But they would not have 3 days. As Sarah and the others returned to town, they found streets filled with commotion. A cavalry detachment had arrived with orders to move against the Apache immediately, following an attack on a stagecoach that had been blamed, perhaps wrongfully, on Rising Wolf's band. They're planning to surround their camp at dawn, Reverend Williams reported grimly after speaking with the soldiers. There's no time to investigate who really attacked the stage. Sarah's heart sank. We have to warn them. Thomas gripped his daughter's shoulders. Sarah, you cannot interfere with army operations. They'll arrest you, or worse. And what happens to Rising Wolf and his people? To Morning Star? Her voice broke. They're seeking peace while others choose war, and they'll be destroyed for it. The conflict in her father's eyes matched the struggle in her own heart. Sometimes, he said softly, we must decide what kind of people we truly are. As midnight approached, Sarah slipped from her bedroom window. The decision had been made. Whatever the consequences, she could not stand by while people died for a crime they likely didn't commit. She rode hard through the darkness, taking hidden trails toward the Apache encampment. Just before she reached their perimeter, a figure emerged from the shadows, arrow nocked and ready. It's Sarah Montgomery, she called softly, raising her hands. I must speak with Rising Wolf immediately. The guard recognized her and lowered his weapon. Within minutes, she stood before the chief, breathlessly explaining the imminent attack. Around them, the camp erupted into controlled activity. Women gathering essential belongings, men preparing defenses. You risked much to bring this warning, Rising Wolf said, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Why? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Because it was right. Because your people deserve better than this. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a connection that defied the circumstances of their meeting. Then Rising Wolf turned to issue orders, his voice commanding yet controlled. "We will move into the high canyon lands," he told her. "There are places where we can defend ourselves if necessary." "And our talks of peace?" she asked, disappointment heavy in her voice. Rising Wolf's expression softened momentarily. "The seed has been planted, Sarah Montgomery. Whether it grows depends on more than just us." As she prepared to depart, he stopped her. "Dawn comes soon. The soldiers will be watching all trails. You cannot return safely to your farm." "I'll find a way," she insisted. "No." His decision was final. "You will come with us, for your own protection. When it is safe, we will ensure your return." And so Sarah found herself riding with the Apache as they slipped away into the night, leaving behind burning campfires that would momentarily deceive the approaching soldiers. Her choice had been made. Whether it would lead to disaster or deliverance remained to be seen. The high canyon country was a labyrinth of stone and shadow, a place where the Apache had sought refuge for generations. 3 days had passed since their escape from the army's attempted ambush. Sarah had sent a message to her father through Naya, assuring him of her safety and asking him to pacify the authorities with a story that she had gone to visit relatives in Tucson. Living among Rising Wolf's people had opened Sarah's eyes to realities she'd only glimpsed before. She watched mothers teaching daughters to grind mesquite beans into flour, observed hunters returning with game that would be shared among all families, and listened to elders telling stories that preserved their history and wisdom. "Your people do not understand us," Morningstar told her one evening as they sat by a small fire. "They see only what they fear, not what truly exists." Sarah nodded sadly. "And many of my people fear what they do not understand." Rising Wolf, who had been listening silently, spoke. "Understanding begins with seeing. You have seen us as we truly are, not as stories paint us." His eyes held hers, and Sarah felt the now familiar flutter in her chest whenever he looked at her this way. Their connection had deepened during these days of shared danger and quiet conversations. She had come to appreciate his thoughtful leadership, his dedication to his people, and his refusal to surrender to despair despite overwhelming odds. That night, unable to sleep, Sarah climbed to a high ledge overlooking the encampment. The stars seemed impossibly bright, a vast blanket of light spread across the heavens. "The stars look different here." Rising Wolf's voice came from behind her. "Closer, perhaps." "I didn't hear you approach," she said, making room for him on the ledge. "Apache children learn to move silently before they learn to run," he replied with a rare smile. "It is a necessary skill in a harsh land." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the night air cool against their skin. "What will happen now?" Sarah finally asked. "The army won't simply forget about your people." Rising Wolf's face grew solemn. "No, they will not forget. They will search, and eventually, they will find us. We cannot remain hidden forever." "Then what alternative is there?" He turned to face her directly. "I have been considering a dangerous plan, one that requires great trust and greater courage." As he explained his idea, Sarah's heart raced with both fear and hope. Rising Wolf proposed sending her back as an emissary, carrying not just words but written terms for a local agreement, one that would allow his people to remain on a portion of their ancestral lands while acknowledging the new reality of white settlement. "The army commanders will not listen," she cautioned. "They have orders from Washington." "Perhaps not," he conceded. "But there are others who might. The territorial governor, newspaper editors in Tucson, even that church leader who came with you. If enough voices join together, even the army must listen." Sarah considered the risks. "If I do this, they might accuse me of collaboration. And if your terms are rejected, the army will know exactly where to find your people." Rising Wolf's hand found hers in the darkness, his touch sending warmth through her despite the night chill. "I would not ask this if I saw another path. Our food stores dwindle. The children suffer. We cannot run forever." His fingers intertwined with hers, and neither pulled away. In that moment, beneath the vast Arizona sky, Sarah recognized the truth she had been avoiding. She had fallen in love with this man whose world was so different from her own, yet whose heart seemed to beat in rhythm with hers. "I will do it," she whispered, "not just for peace, but for a future where perhaps—" She couldn't finish the thought. Rising Wolf's free hand gently turned her face toward his, where perhaps people from different worlds might find common ground. He completed her thought. Their first kiss was tentative, then certain. A promise exchanged without words, a bridge built between separate shores. The following morning, Sarah prepared to depart. Rising Wolf had written the proposed terms in careful English, a skill he had learned years earlier from a missionary. The document outlined reasonable boundaries, water rights, and mutual protection agreements. It acknowledged American authority while preserving Apache dignity and sufficient land for their survival. Before she left, Morningstar performed a blessing ceremony, asking the spirits to protect her journey. The old man's eyes held knowledge of things unseen as he placed weathered hands on her shoulders. "You carry more than papers," he told her cryptically. "You carry hope between worlds that have known only fear." Rising Wolf embraced her privately, away from the watching eyes of his people. "Return to us if you can," he said. "Whatever happens, know that you have changed how I see the possible future." Sarah rode out with Naya as her guide for the first portion of the journey. They traveled cautiously, avoiding main trails where army patrols might be watching. By nightfall, they reached the edge of familiar territory, and Naya turned back while Sarah continued alone toward Willow Creek. She arrived home near midnight, finding her father sleepless and worried despite her messages. Thomas listened gravely as she explained Rising Wolf's proposal. "It's well-reasoned," he admitted after reading the document, "but getting the right people to consider it will be nearly impossible. The Army has declared Rising Wolf an enemy of the territory, and they're blaming his band for the stagecoach attack and 2 settler deaths near Parker's Ridge." "But his people were nowhere near Parker's Ridge," Sarah protested. "They've been in the canyons." "Truth matters less than convenience in times like these," her father said bitterly. "They need someone to blame, and Rising Wolf refused their orders." Refusing to surrender hope, Sarah reached out to Reverend Williams the next day. The elderly minister agreed to help arrange a meeting with Judge Carlton, one of the few territorial officials known for fair dealings with native tribes. "This will not be easy, child," the Reverend warned. "The winds of fear blow strong, and many profit from conflict who would lose from peace." 3 days later, in the Reverend's small study, Sarah presented Rising Wolf's proposal to Judge Carlton. The white-haired jurist studied the document thoroughly, asking pertinent questions about enforcement and boundaries. "This is remarkably reasonable," he finally said. "If I didn't know better, I'd think it was drafted by a lawyer rather than an Apache chief." "Rising Wolf understands more about our world than most realize," Sarah replied. "Just as I've learned his people are nothing like the savages described in penny novels." Judge Carlton's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Your advocacy goes beyond mere diplomacy, Miss Montgomery. One might wonder at your personal interest in this matter." Sarah met his gaze unflinchingly. "My personal interests align with justice and preventing needless bloodshed, Your Honor. Nothing more need concern you." A slight smile touched the judge's lips. "Well said." He tapped the document. "I'll present this to the governor myself. He owes me a favor, and he's no friend of the Army's heavy-handed tactics. But I must warn you, the military operates under federal authority. They may not feel bound by territorial agreements." Hope flickered within Sarah, but complications arose almost immediately. Word of her return had spread, and Major Harrison arrived at the Montgomery farm with a squad of soldiers the following morning. "Miss Montgomery," he stated coldly, "you're ordered to report to Fort Williams for questioning regarding your association with hostile Apache elements." Thomas stepped forward protectively. "My daughter has broken no laws, Major. Consorting with enemies of the United States is indeed against the law, Mr. Montgomery, as is providing intelligence to hostiles." The Major's hand rested meaningfully on his sidearm. "She will come voluntarily or under arrest." Sarah squeezed her father's arm reassuringly. "It's all right, Father. I have nothing to hide." The lie came easily. She would protect Rising Wolf's location at all costs. At Fort Williams, Sarah found herself in a sparsely furnished room. facing not just Major Harrison but Colonel Westfield, the regional commander whose reputation for ruthlessness was well established. "Your actions border on treason, young woman," the colonel began without preamble. "Aiding a renegade band, interfering with military operations. These are hanging offenses in wartime." "We are not at war, Colonel," Sarah replied calmly. "And Rising Wolf's people have committed no hostile acts against settlers or the army. The deaths at Parker's Ridge suggest otherwise. Rising Wolf's band was nowhere near Parker's Ridge. You're pursuing the wrong people." The questioning continued for hours. They demanded Rising Wolf's location, information about his warriors and weapons, details about his movements. Sarah revealed nothing of value, claiming she had been blindfolded during much of her time with the Apache. Another necessary lie. As dusk approached, the interrogation was interrupted by the arrival of Judge Carleton, accompanied by a harried-looking lieutenant. "Colonel Westfield," the judge announced, "I have just come from the governor. He has reviewed certain proposals and wishes to pursue a diplomatic solution to the current situation." The colonel's face darkened. "With all due respect to the governor, Judge, military matters fall under federal jurisdiction." "True," Carleton agreed smoothly, "which is why the governor telegraphed the War Department directly. Their response arrived an hour ago." He produced an official telegram. "The secretary wishes to avoid another costly Indian campaign if possible. The governor is authorized to negotiate a regional settlement, provided certain conditions are met." Westfield read the telegram, his expression unreadable. "This changes nothing immediately. We still have a hostile band at large, and this young woman knows their location. Which is why," the judge continued, "Miss Montgomery has been appointed as a special envoy to arrange a preliminary meeting. She will be released into my custody immediately." Sarah could scarcely believe this sudden turn. Outside the fort, as the judge helped her into his carriage, she whispered, "How did you manage this?" Carleton's eyes twinkled. "The governor actually owed me 2 favors, and he's ambitious. Resolving an Apache conflict diplomatically would distinguish him in Washington circles. Sometimes, my dear, self-interest aligns with justice." Within hours, Sarah was preparing for a return journey to the canyons, this time carrying an official letter from the territorial governor, proposing a meeting in neutral territory. Judge Carleton would accompany her part way, lending credibility to the mission. As they departed at dawn, Sarah noticed increased military activity around Fort Williams. "They're preparing for something," she said uneasily. The judge nodded grimly. "Colonel Westfield is not a man who accepts civilian interference gracefully. We must reach Rising Wolf before the army does." The race against time had begun. While Sarah carried an offer of peace, Westfield's forces were mobilizing for war. The future hung in a precarious balance, and with it the lives of hundreds of people, as well as Sarah's newfound love and hope for a world where understanding might finally triumph over fear. Dawn broke in ribbons of amber and gold across the canyon lands as Sarah and Judge Carleton approached the arranged meeting place, a natural amphitheater formed by weathered sandstone, located halfway between the Army's forward camp and the Apache stronghold. Rising Wolf had chosen this location carefully. It offered clear sight lines in all directions, preventing ambush while allowing swift retreat if necessary. Sarah's heart pounded as she spotted the small Apache delegation already waiting. Rising Wolf stood at their center, flanked by Morning Star and 2 trusted warriors. Their eyes met across the distance, and though his expression remained impassive, she could read relief in the subtle relaxation of his shoulders. "He cares for you deeply," Judge Carleton observed quietly. "I've negotiated with native leaders for 30 years, and I've never seen one look at a white woman that way." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Our friendship has grown through mutual respect." "Friendship," the judge repeated with a knowing smile. "Well, friendship has accomplished what a regiment of cavalry couldn't. Let's hope it's enough to prevent bloodshed." They dismounted and approached on foot, as had been arranged. Rising Wolf stepped forward, his bearing regal despite the circumstances. "Sarah Montgomery," he greeted her formally, though his eyes conveyed much more. "You have returned as promised." "With hope for a path forward," she replied, gesturing to her companion. "This is Judge Ambrose Carleton, representing the territorial governor." The negotiations began cautiously, with Morning Star performing a brief blessing ceremony that Judge Carlton respectfully observed. For hours they discussed boundaries, hunting rights, water access, and mechanisms to resolve future disputes. The judge was impressed by Rising Wolf's clear understanding of American legal concepts and his pragmatic approach to securing his people's essential needs rather than making impossible demands. "You speak our language well, both literally and figuratively," Carlton remarked. Rising Wolf's expression remained serious. "I learned your words from missionaries as a boy. I learned your thinking by watching what brings peace and what brings war between our peoples." By midday, they had drafted an agreement that, while imperfect, offered genuine promise. The Apache would retain rights to a significant portion of their traditional territories, smaller than they deserved, but sufficient for survival. In exchange, they would permit settler access to certain water sources and travel routes, while both sides would establish a council to address grievances before they escalated to violence. As Judge Carlton prepared the final document, Sarah and Rising Wolf walked a short distance away, finding a measure of privacy behind a large boulder. "You have accomplished what seemed impossible," he told her, his voice soft with admiration. "We both have," she corrected. "Your wisdom in seeking peace when others clamored for war made this possible." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "When this is formalized, when my people's future is secure," he hesitated, searching for words. "Sarah Montgomery, our worlds have always been separate, but perhaps they need not remain so." Before she could respond, a distant dust cloud caught their attention. Riders were approaching rapidly from the direction of Fort Williams, far more than the small escort that had been agreed upon for the signing ceremony. "Colonel Westfield," Sarah whispered, dread washing over her. He never intended to honor the negotiations. Rising Wolf's expression hardened. "My warriors are positioned in the high rocks. They will protect our retreat." Judge Carlton joined them, his face grim. "I feared this might happen. The colonel received new orders this morning, directly from a general in Washington who apparently outranks our diplomatic efforts." "Then all was for nothing," Rising Wolf said bitterly. "Not nothing," Sarah insisted, gripping his arm. "We have the signed agreement, the governor's seal. This is a legal document that even the army must eventually respect." "Eventually," he repeated, "means little if my people die today." The approaching cavalry was now clearly visible, at least 60 mounted soldiers led by Colonel Westfield himself. They would arrive within minutes. Rising Wolf turned to his companions. "Morning Star, take our people back to the canyon stronghold. Judge Carlton, you and Sarah should distance yourselves from us immediately. Claim you were held against your will if necessary." "No," Sarah declared firmly. "I won't perpetuate that lie." "And I," the judge added, "will not abandon a legal treaty at the first sign of opposition. Colonel Westfield must be made to understand he's interfering with territorial business." Rising Wolf studied them both, then nodded once, a gesture of respect and gratitude. He issued quick orders to his warriors in their native tongue. While most retreated with the elders, 4 remained, taking defensive positions among the rocks. As the cavalry approached, Sarah moved to stand beside Rising Wolf, her hand finding his. Whatever came, they would face it together. Colonel Westfield reined his horse to a halt, his face contorted with anger as he surveyed the scene. "Judge Carlton, step away from those hostiles immediately." The elderly jurist straightened to his full height. "I am conducting official territorial business, Colonel. I have here a duly authorized agreement between the Apache Nation and the Arizona Territorial Government." "That paper means nothing," Westfield spat. "I have orders to bring in all hostiles, especially that one." He pointed directly at Rising Wolf. "He's wanted for the murders at Parker's Ridge." Rising Wolf's band was nowhere near Parker's Ridge. Sarah interjected. "They've been in the canyons for weeks." "Silence," the colonel barked. "You'll be court-martialed for treason when this is finished." He turned to his men. "Secure the hostiles. If they resist, you know what to do." As the soldiers began to dismount, Morning Star suddenly reappeared from behind a rock formation. The ancient medicine man walked slowly into the open space between the groups, his weathered hands raised toward the sky. "This ground is sacred," he announced in clear English that surprised even Rising Wolf. Blood spilled here will curse both peoples for generations. The old man's presence created momentary confusion. Colonel Westfield hesitated, perhaps superstitious despite himself. In that instant, Judge Carleton seized the opportunity. "Colonel, I urge you to consider the consequences of your actions. The governor has sanctioned this agreement. Washington may have issued orders, but those orders were given without knowledge of our diplomatic progress." "My orders are clear," Westfield insisted, though with less certainty. "Are they?" the judge pressed. "Do they specifically instruct you to disrupt a peace treaty and potentially ignite a territorial war? Do they authorize you to countermand the governor's explicit directives?" Sarah stepped forward. "Colonel, for 3 years your soldiers have chased shadows through these canyons. How many men have you lost? How many settlers have died because fear and misunderstanding continue to rule? This agreement offers a different path." Westfield's jaw tightened, but doubt had crept into his expression. A lieutenant approached, speaking quietly in his ear. The colonel nodded, then addressed Rising Wolf directly. "My scout informs me your warriors hold the high ground surrounding us. A clever tactical position. Not for ambush," Rising Wolf replied calmly. "For protection, should words fail where honor should prevail." The standoff stretched for long, tense minutes. Sarah could feel her heartbeat in her throat, acutely aware that one wrong move could unleash violence that would destroy everything they'd worked to build. Finally, Colonel Westfield made his decision. "I will dispatch a rider to Fort Williams with this treaty document. If the governor confirms by telegraph that it bears his authorization, we will withdraw pending further orders from Washington." Relief washed over Sarah, though she knew this was merely a temporary reprieve. The true test would come in the days ahead, as the agreement faced challenges from those who profited from conflict. As the army withdrew to a respectful distance to await confirmation, Rising Wolf, Sarah, and Judge Carleton conferred quietly. "This is only the beginning," the judge cautioned. "Many will oppose this treaty, land speculators, mining interests, even some of your own warriors who distrust peace." Rising Wolf nodded solemnly. "The path of peace is often more difficult to walk than the path of war, but it is the only path that does not end in destruction." His eyes found Sarah's, holding questions neither could ask aloud with others present. What place would she have in this new future? How could they bridge the vast differences in their worlds? By sunset, word arrived that the governor had indeed confirmed the treaty's legitimacy. Colonel Westfield, though clearly displeased, was a soldier who followed orders, even those he disagreed with. The immediate crisis had passed. In the weeks that followed, the agreement faced numerous challenges. Twice, unidentified raiders attacked settler homesteads, attempting to provoke retaliation against Rising Wolf's people. Sarah worked tirelessly alongside Judge Carleton to maintain the fragile peace, traveling between Willow Creek and the Apache settlements to facilitate communication and resolve misunderstandings before they escalated. Thomas Montgomery, initially skeptical of his daughter's involvement, became an unexpected ally. His farm became neutral ground where Apache representatives and settler delegates could meet safely to address concerns. "You were right," he told Sarah one evening as they watched Rising Wolf ride away after such a meeting. "Understanding begins with seeing people as they truly are, not as we fear them to be." Sarah smiled, her eyes following Rising Wolf's retreating figure. "Some barriers take more courage to cross than others." Her father studied her face knowingly. "You love him." It wasn't a question, and Sarah didn't deny it. "Yes," she said simply. "Though I don't know how such love can find a place in this world." Thomas placed a weathered hand on his daughter's shoulder. "The world changes, Sarah, sometimes slowly, sometimes in great leaps, but it always changes for those brave enough to show it a different path." 6 months after the treaty signing, as spring breathed new life into the desert, Rising Wolf came to the Montgomery farm alone. The peace had held, despite occasional tensions. Trading had resumed between settlements. Children from both communities had even begun to play together at the boundaries of their territories. Sarah found him waiting by the old oak where they had first conspired for peace. "The Council of Elders has asked me to establish a permanent trading post at the boundary of our lands," he told her. "A place where our peoples can meet and exchange more than just goods. A place to share knowledge, stories, perhaps even friendship. That's wonderful news, she replied, though something in his tone suggested there was more. Rising, Wolf took her hands in his. I told them I would accept this responsibility on one condition. His dark eyes held hers. That you would join me as my wife, bringing your wisdom and courage to help build this bridge between our worlds. Sarah's breath caught. The proposal was both everything she had dreamed of and more complicated than she had imagined. There will be opposition, she whispered. From both sides. Yes, he agreed. The path will not be easy, but as you once told me, he smiled slightly, nothing worth doing ever is. My father already gave his blessing when I asked him this morning, Rising Wolf revealed, though he warned me that you make your own decisions and always have. Joy bubbled up within her, along with determination to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Then my decision is yes, she said, stepping into his embrace. Yes to building something new together. Yes to showing others what becomes possible when fear gives way to understanding. Their kiss sealed a promise that extended beyond themselves, to their communities, to the future generations who might grow up knowing cooperation instead of conflict, to a world where differences could enrich rather than divide. 1 year later, the trading post had grown into a small settlement where Apache and white families lived and worked side by side. It wasn't perfect. Tensions occasionally flared, old prejudices resurfaced, and outside forces sometimes threatened the fragile peace. But each challenge strengthened the bonds between those who had chosen understanding over fear. Sarah and Rising Wolf's home sat at the center of this community, a place where councils met, disputes were resolved, and children from both worlds played freely. Their union, once considered impossible, had become a living symbol of the very peace they had risked everything to create. On a warm evening, as they watched the sunset paint the canyon walls in brilliant hues, Rising Wolf's arm encircled Sarah's shoulders. Do you remember what you said when we first met in Willow Creek? He asked, when everyone else backed away in fear. Sarah smiled at the memory. You don't scare me, she recalled. Perhaps the most important words I've ever spoken. They changed everything, he agreed, drawing her closer. Because when one person refuses to fear what others call dangerous, a new world becomes possible. Together they watched night claim the land that now belonged to both their peoples, a shared inheritance for generations who might never know how close they had come to losing it all, or how much had been saved by one woman's courage to see beyond fear to the humanity they all shared.